find something. Yeah, okay. It all runs into stuff. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay. One should economize throughout the week in order to buy food in honor of Shabbos. Ezra instituted that clothing should be laundered on Thursday in honor of Shabbos. And okay, so it says to buy food in honor of Shabbos. If a person spends on food in honor of Shabbos, it will be added to his yearly occasion in Shamayim. From Shamayim, Chazal tell us that the amount that each person receives for his sustenance each year is predetermined on each Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, one must be careful not to overspend, because the predetermined amount may not be enough to accommodate such expenditures. But this sum doesn't include Shabbos or Yom Tov expenses, nor does it include money spent on providing one's sons with Torah education. Regarding these, one will get back whatever he or she spends. A person should even borrow with interest for Shabbos meals or any other mitzvah meal, but only from a non-Jew or from a Jew in a permitted fashion. If a person receives a gift of food with instructions to eat it on Shabbos, he may not eat it during the week. This is what the Sefer Hasidim hold. Shulchan Aruch holds that a poor person who receives money from the Purim collection may opt to use it for whatever he wants, even though it was clearly collected for the Purim Sudah. And we're going back to the laundering, then we'll finish. Clothing laundered on Thursday, on of Shabbos, shouldn't be left for Friday, because Friday should be left prepared for Shabbos as in the meal, which is extremely important. And considering the main interest of this institution was for people to wear freshly laundered clothes on Shabbos, one should not wear the same robe for more than a week without laundering it, as this would be a transgression of Ezra's institution.
Okay, so Arthur, as to no fault of his own, disappeared for 20 minutes of the other share, so I'm not going to subject you to that much repetition. I do know Arthur so from that he even went back to that video to go and have a look at it. Hey, Arthur. Okay, so I'll just give a summary for 2 or 3 minutes to fill in where he left off, and hopefully that'll count. So we learned an original suggestion that it was suggested that with Rav Yaakov, we said that your 1/5 surcharge, if it's the same as the kefil payment in terms of identical amount, you don't have to pay it once and it would suffice. If the amounts differ, you pay the kefil payment after the principal, and once the kefil payment is made, which is the knas, the penalty, then afterwards you pay the 1/5 surcharge and the asham offering. So it says that, does it count? Is this a case where it was originally worth 4 zuzim and in the end it was worth 4 zuzim? In other words, at the beginning of the theft, that's what the Chardonnay bottle was worth, and by the time it came to trial, it was still worth 4 zuz. Okay. Now we're saying that can't be the case, because if you look at the surcharges paid on the principal, so if you say that, as Kevin quite rightly said last time, you can make it out that if you add a 1/5 to the amount, it equals 4/5. In other words, 25% on 400 is 80. It's actually 80 zuz. It's not 100. But there are opinions that say, look, you look at it as a total figure, and you say, listen, it's 500 zuz. 400 of it goes, which is 400 of it goes, which is your 80% to the principal, and the 20% remaining, which is 1/5 surcharge, which would be 100 zuz, that would be for the surcharge. In other words, you work out the amount in total. Now, we're going according to those opinions just because it makes the calculation easier, as I said. So that whenever there's a principal of 4 zuz, then and the surcharge 1/5 is a zuz, then you say, okay, that's fine. But then if it started off at 4 zuz, the value, and the kefil payment is based on what you pay at the point of court for the theft, and it's still holding at the same level for zuz, then your issue is that your careful payment, if it's on Chardonnay, I'm not talking about a Oxford sheep where it's in multiples, but here it's just double the principal. In other words, it's the principal plus the same amount for the careful, which means you've got 4 zuz for the careful, which means the 1/5 surcharge, which is only a zuz, the amounts don't equal up. So all we're saying is that can't be the case that Rav Yaakov is talking about. So it makes a suggestion. It says, look, originally it must have been worth 4 zuzim, and in the end it was only worth a zuz. So if we take the Chardonnay, it was worth 4 zuz when I stole it from Kevin, and then there was a winery that opened up in Cape Town, and at the time you could only get the Chardonnay from California. So when the winery opened up in Cape Town, there was a glut in the market for Chardonnay, and Chardonnay then only became worth a zuz. So in that case, you have the 1/5 surcharge that's based on the principle. So 1/5 of 4 zuzim is either 4/5 of a zuz if you're holding like Kevin and many of the Rabbonim, or if you're holding that you're taking the 1/5 surcharge as a total amount of 20%. So you've got 500 Rand, right? So 400 Rand goes to the principal, and an extra 20%, which is 100 Rand, goes for the surcharge. So we're working it out there. So fine, the 1/5 surcharge, and that would be 1 zuz. And we're saying the careful payment would mimic what the value of the item was worth at the court date or when it was consumed. So even if the court date is in August, but I consumed the Chardonnay in July because my next door neighbor saw me chugging it down, at that point it's only worth a zuz, right? So because of the time delay and that glut in the market, etc. So then the careful payment is based on at the trial date, the latest value, or when it was consumed, which is a zuz, because it dropped down from 4 zuz to a zuz, and that mimics the 1/5 surcharge based on the original principle, which was at the time we stole it, it was worth 4 zuz, and the 1/5 surcharge was a zuz. So we're saying, and that's a case where the two match up, and that's a proof for Rav. How's that a proof for Rav? Because if you remember, Rav ruled that he pays the principal according to the stolen article's value when he stole it. Okay? And for the 2-fold, 4-fold, or 5-fold payment, that's according to the stolen article's value when he was sued in court. So if you look at it on that sort of basis, both the principal and the careful would be paid in accordance with the stolen article's value at the time the case is brought to court. Okay? The 1/5 surcharge and the principal, which is a function of the principal, would not be a zuz, but a quarter of a zuz. So what we're basically saying here is this brisa would have to work according to Rav's ruling, because otherwise it doesn't work. So in other words, what we're saying is, in order for the amounts to match, it has to start off at 4 zuz, it drops to a zuz. Okay, then the 1/5 surcharge that's based on the principle is 1 zuz. Then if it dropped from 4 zuz to 1 zuz, and the careful payment, the penalty knas payment, is made at the date of the court, when the wine was consumed, or towards the court date, then that would only be a zuz. The two would cancel each other out in the sense that there would be a duplicate payment, and that goes according to Rav. Kev, can you explain to me how it goes according to Rav before I move on?
What Rav about? Because he's got a different view. No, I can't.
No, that's okay. So let me just unpack it simply. This is Rav's principle, okay? Not me. Let's not use me as an example. I've got enough spiritual problems. I don't want to bring theft into the world by me articulating it. So Shimon takes from Reuven his Chardonnay, and at the time when he was stolen, worth 4 zuz, okay? And then what happened is Reuven wasn't happy, took Shimon to court, and at the court date they found, maybe a few weeks before the court date, that it was actually consumed by Ruvain, and there were witnesses to testify that he was drunk and loud. He passed out with a bottle of Chardonnay in his hand, the very same Chardonnay stole from Kevin. So the penalty part of the payment is assessed at the time, according to Rav, of either the court date or when it was consumed, or if it was an animal when it was slaughtered or sold, wherever there was a change that took place, or as close to the court date as possible. That's when the assessment of the penalty payment occurs. The one for surcharge is based on the principal. When does Rav say the principal is assessed? When the item was stolen. So if it was worth 4 zuz at the time it was stolen and at the court date 1 zuz, then on 4 zuz, the one for surcharge, if you're working it out from the total, would be 1 zuz. And then if it dropped in value, that Chardonnay to 1 zuz at the time of trial, again, the penalty would be based on that. And that would be 1 zuz. The one for surcharge, 1 zuz, so you only pay 1 zuz. That works well according to Rav Yaakov, but it would only work according to Rav Yaakov if we adhere to Rav's principle, meaning that the principle is paid back in terms of the value at the time of theft, and the penalty payment is paid at the time when the matter comes to court or changes in status, because that's when it's slaughtered if it's an animal, or that's when it's sold or consumed if it is an item. Very clear? So we're saying it has to go according to Rav. That's his principle. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Because if you say that the assessments were either both at the time of the theft or both at the court date, it wouldn't go according to Rav Yaakov with his example. So all we are saying, Kevin, is that this is a proof. Rav Yaakov's example here is a proof for Rav, that it has to be assessed the principle at the time when it's stolen, and the penalty payment at the time when there's a court date or it's a change of status, where it's consumed, sold, or slaughtered. That's all we're saying. It's a proof for Rav. That's all we're saying. Now, has everybody got me thus far? Yes or no? Okay, cool. So now we're saying that the Gemara after this rejects the proof. And the reason why is actually quite genius. Rava came out with a principle, and he said, listen, you don't have to hold that a principal is paid at the time of theft and the penalty at the time of the court date, because it could still work according to Rav Yaakov. And the bottom line is, all Rav is saying is this is not a proof for Rav. This is not a proof for Rav. It could be that it works with Rav, but it could also be working in a case where you don't have to agree with Rav. And what does he say? How does he lay it out? And this is very clever. He turns around and says, look, in fact, it might be that the Bryce is dealing with where originally the stolen article was worth 4 zuzim. And now, too, when the case is brought to court, it's still worth 4 zuzim. In other words, you don't have to drop the value in order to make it work for Rav Yaakov. It just doesn't necessarily have to work according to Rav. Because as for the difficulty this raises, that if so, the kefil payment amounts to 4 zuzim, meaning the penalty payment, whereas the 1/5 surcharge amounts only to a zuz, and the larger kefil payment cannot therefore account for the 1/5 surcharge. In other words, they don't match. It wouldn't fit with Rav Yaakov. We can say it does, but you don't have to see it according to Rav, because otherwise then you'd have to drop what the value of the item is worth now in order that the penalty payment matches the 1/5 surcharge. So he said it's not a proof for Rav necessarily. This could work with Rav Yaakov. So what case are we dealing with here? With the case in which he swore falsely that the deposit was stolen. And then he swore again and again, a total of 4 times. And then he confessed. Okay? So what we're actually saying is he repeated the same false oath that the deposit was stolen 4 times. And every time he took a false oath, he owes the 1/5 surcharge. So if you do that on 4 zuzim, okay, the 1/5 on 4 zuzim would be according to Kevin and many Rabbonim, 400 zuz, it would be 80 zuz. And according to some Rabbonim, it would be 1/5 from the total, which would be 100 zuz. But either way, how do you get 100 zuz matching how do you get the 100 zuz matching the 400 zuz principle in the surcharge and the kefil? All you have to do, as far as the 1/5 surcharge, as you say, originally it was worth 400 zuz. The penalty is only 100 zuz. But if he lies 4 times, then for each account of lying, he has to pay that as a penalty. So then equals 100 zuz, 200 zuz, 300 zuz, 400 zuz, which means if the item was worth 400 zuz originally, it ended up being worth 400 zuz at the time when the item was assessed at court. Then the 400 zuz, which is the 1/5 surcharge, because it's 100 zuz times 4 times acts of lying, matches the kefil payment of 400 zuz. So in that case, it doesn't have to be a proof of Rav that the principal is assessed at the time of the theft and the penalty is assessed at the time of the court date or a change in status, which means you can have Rav Yaakov without it proving Rav. Does that make sense? Which I think is very clever.
But what I'm saying, somebody who lies 4 times like that actually it's such a disgrace. Really, just like,
I can't hear you, Gav.
I think somebody who lies under oath 4 times in a row on the same issue deserves to be put to death, in my opinion, my humble opinion.
And we thank God that Gavin is not in the Sanhedrin and he sticks to the
person like that, he's so stupid. To keep if they keep coming and asking you to do an oath on the same issue, and obviously they expect you. Lost it. Just stop lying. Just come see. Anyway, just my 2 cents.
Listen, I think you're 100% correct, and that's why. That's how to get rid of stupid people living in your neighborhood and thieving people. You just keep clapping with them penalties, and then the stupid people will leave. The clever people and the stupid people will live with stupid people. That's perfect. The way to get rid of the idiots out of the village. I agree with you, Gav. Absolutely agree. Well, obviously his heart sank because the witnesses only came afterwards. You know what I'm saying? And then he was.
No, I understand, but the witness, for him to have lied 4 times, there were several witnesses coming. They were really getting suspicious of him. To ask him to retake the oath. You know what I'm saying? It was building up to such a level. He should have given up at that point and come see. Anyway, but it sounds like it goes right up to the 4th. I know it's a theoretical example. It's going right up to the 4th, and the guy still hasn't acknowledged that he lied. He just said he was caught out.
Yeah, he was caught out. I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. So, Arth, I just want to know that you understand where we're holding since we did this revision report for you. Okay.
You might be there. He's better to reconnect. That followed me yesterday.
Arth?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, has it made sense what I've said?
See, the minute I put the picture on.
You just let me know.
Yeah, I can, but I can't hear when I'm talking to you now because the picture's going.
No, that's fine. But did you understand what we were saying?
Not really, I'll be honest. I understood the mathematics is quite complicated for me at the moment. There's no sleep, so.
All right, so I tell you what we'll do another time is you and I will do a 1-on-1. I know you can hardly wait for that, but that's a privilege.
Hold on. I tell you, it's all come clear to me. Wow, that was amazing. How did you do it?
Okay, cool. Give it over.
I can't hear the lines bad. What?
You're developing a Gomorrah cop as we speak. All right. Short, mate. Okay. We'll go, and if you have any questions, I'll let you know. All right. So, guys, let's just move on. Whoever's chapt is chapt. So the Gemara analyzes and explains the brisa that it just cited. The master said in a brisa, but the sages say the verse states with regard to the 1/5 surcharge, and he shall return that which he sinned in its principal amount and its fifth. This implies to money that is paid in its principal amount, he adds a fifth, okay? But to money that is not paid in its principal amount alone, but rather in multiples of the principal, he does not add a fifth. So what the master of the Bryce is saying here is that we learn from the Chumash. Do you remember there was opinion of Rav Yaakov, the sages, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai? Okay, and the bottom line of it is that Rav Yaakov says there's 1/5 surcharge and there's an asham offering, even if he was caught lying by witnesses and afterwards he was sorry. The sages say there's no 1/5 surcharge because they understood the verse is talking about in its principle. He adds a fifth, but not if it's dealing with anything more than the principle. But he still brings an asham offering to Hashem. And then you have Rav Shimon ben Yochai, who turns around and says there's no 1/5 surcharge or asham offering to Hashem, because how sorry could I suppose he might be thinking, I don't know, how sorry can the person really be if they only came clean when the witnesses testified against them? But I mean, he's interpreting it from the verse and says he does not add a fifth to the principal amount if it's in multiples, basically, from evidence of the pasuk. So, look, at least it's evident that the sages and Rav Yaakov agree in one matter, that at least that there's an asham offering, because the sages say that there's no 1/5 surcharge, but the asham offering they'd agree with, and Rav Yaakov says both an asham offering in 1/5. So what's the point of agreement? The asham offering, that's where they agree. So the Gemara basically wants to know why the sages make a distinction between the 1/5 surcharge and the asham offering. In other words, it says, what is different about the 1/5 surcharge that he does not pay it when there is a kefil? Okay? Apparently it's because it's written, and he shall return that which he sinned in its principal and its fifth. So that's what it says in the pasuk. And what does that imply? That 1/5 surcharge is assessed only when the stolen article is repaid in its principal amount, and therefore not in multiples of the principal. But by the same token, he should not pay, the Gemara is suggesting, the ashram offering either, because it's written, and he shall pay in its principal amount, and its fifth he shall add to it, and his ashram offering he shall bring to Hashem. So the Gemara is going to answer, look, the rabbis would say to you, by inserting the word es prior to the expression his asham offering, the verse separates the asham offering from the previous words, and he shall pay in its principal amount and its fifth. So what I was going to say is, es is how the Ashkenazi people pronounce it, et.
Yeah, can I say something about that?
Paskaya, yeah, sure.
When you use the word it, it's talking about something specific, and there's a whole, we can talk about it in Hebrew. You have to use a different conjugation. So it, I'll give you an example. It's always something specific. So if you talk about my phone, and you talk about the phone, you say otcha, oto, because it's male. You don't say ze. You say, so in Hebrew it's when they, and I went to hear that, so I'm sure it relates to it, yeah. It's talking about something specific.
Correct. So exactly what Kevin says. When it talks about specific, it says et ashamu. In other words, the atonement, he shall pay in its principal amount, and its fifths he shall add to it. In other words, whenever it's talking specifically about a principal amount only, the fifth shall be added to it. So it's saying it's dealing with that. When it uses the word and his asham offering he shall bring to Hashem, Kevin is completely right, because if you remember correctly, the one verse was in Bamidbar in Numbers, and the other verse was in Vayikra in Leviticus. So they were separated anyway. So the first vet Ashamu is a separate verse, completely dealing with the Asham offering. It's quite specific to that, whereas the other one is talking about the principle and its fit. So the Gemara answers exactly like Kevin said, that the word et separates the Asham offering from the principal payment, because it's referring directly to the fact that you pay Hashem no matter what. And the Gemara says that the verse connects the Asham offering to the preceding verse, and the Asham offering is therefore contingent upon the payment of principal without multiples. So the Gemara is saying, hang on a second, seems like a bit of a contradiction, because the rabbis at first say to you, by inserting the word et prior to the expression his Asham offering, the verse separates the Asham offering from the previous verse, and he shall pay in its principal amount and its fifth. Exactly as Kevin said, it's specific to the Asham offering. And the Gemara asks Rav Shimon ben Yochai, how would he derive it? Because Rav Shimon ben Yochai says, look, as far as that's concerned, if you don't pay the one for surcharge on the principal with multiples, you don't pay the Asham offering. And he derives from this verse that the Asham offering is also contingent upon the payment of principal without multiples. Because he does not say as well that the word et separates the Asham offering from the principal payment. So he learns it differently. Okay? So then the Gemara asks, he holds that by stating the word va as the connecting vav, so to speak, okay? And the et, which obviously creates a separation, what does that actually mean? So in other words, what's happening is, although it does separate the concept, it connects it with a vav, which means that just like in a principal case where you don't pay the 1/5 surcharge, when there's more, when there are multiples of the principal, so you don't pay the Asham offering. Okay? Now, the rabbis say, well, they're going to basically be asked, well, what would you use the conjunction vav for? In other words, Rav Shimon ben Yochai is saying, listen, the vav is proving that that principle continues throughout. Does that make sense, Kev?
Vav is usually and.
Yes.
It's not.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's a connecting principle, which means he's saying, if I say to you, for example, Kevin, you only pay a 1/5 surcharge when you pay the principal, okay? And implicit in that statement is when you pay multiples of the principal, because you were caught lying, how sorry could you really be? Then, and you use the connecting word according to Rav Shimon ben Yochai, is you saying that that same sort of ethical principle connects itself to that other pasuk in Leviticus, the same pasuk that you had in Bamidbar, meaning that the principle is that if there's any sort of penalty payment, you don't pay the Asham offering. The vav is meant to connect the principle together. So then we're going to say, well, then how does Rav Shimon ben Yochai, what need does he have for a specific separation with the word et? Because if I'm using the word et, it means I'm only referring to one part of it. So why have something that's connecting and something conceptually that's focused on a specific, which is a separation? In other words, if I'm speaking to you, it means I'm excluding Gavin from this particular address. Does that make sense? So what it's saying is, what would the rabbis say? In other words, if the rabbis are saying that the minute it has the word et, it means you're still obligated for the Asham offering, but not for the 1/5 when the principle ends up in multiples. So the rabbis have to explain what they would use the conjunction vav for. Okay, because otherwise it seems like a contradiction. So they say, let the merciful one in his Torah write neither the connecting and nor the separating S. In other words, if you're having something that's connecting them together in a concept, as Kevin said, that's specifically addressing one thing, that's a separating concept. Because the minute I'm referring to specificity, I'm separating the general. Okay, so what would be the point in first separating Asham with the word S, then reconnecting it with additional and? So Rav Shimon's reply is, he would say to you that the Torah did not have an option to write the word et, because it's needed to interpose between the money of the Most High and the money of the common person. Basically, you have to show Hashem enough respect that you address him separately, even if the principle continues to be the same, that if you never paid, you don't pay a 1/5 atonement if you were caught lying, because the whole reason you're caught lying, that's why you're paying the penalty. So when you're caught lying, how sorry can you be? The pasuk is only talking about in principle when you came clean. And therefore the Asham you also don't bring to Hashem. But why does it separate it with the S? Because Hashem deserves the greatest respect, that you should just address Hashem separately to the common people. But he's still saying that the principle with the connecting vav means the same way you don't pay the 1/5 surcharge when somebody is lying, you don't pay the Asham offering when they're caught lying either. Make sense, guys? It's pretty straightforward. Guys, yes? No?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. So, now before we do the next part, which is a whole discussion in and of itself, I think we can leave it today, because this whole principle is going into a completely different side of things. Are you with me? Now, I just want to ask Arthur what he doesn't understand about what we dealt before with the numbers.
Numbers.
Yeah, I'm stopping the Arthur.
And then Damon, just repeat your last point before you speak to Arthur. So I was just putting my computer down and
Like also, the minute to get on anyway.
unmuted.
Arthur's unmuted. Arthur,
Yeah.
what exactly don't you understand? You did it with Rabbi Code. Tell me what you don't understand.
Well, no, I'm exhausted, so my brain's not absorbing anything at the moment. But I understand with the S and was respecting Hashem and going straight to him. I understand that part. It's just understand also that you don't obviously don't get the benefit if you didn't confess and you were caught out. But if you did confess, you get the benefit. That I understand as well. Just like the 1/5 and all that stuff, I sort of get the idea, because that's your penalty for it. But I just got to go through it when I'm awake. When I've actually
no, that's fair.
I have no idea
Only at sleep. I don't blame you for not processing. So,
that's good.
100%. Kev, all we're saying is that Rav Shimon Ben Yochai is basically saying whenever you don't pay the 5th, you don't pay the Asham offering. Rav Yaakov's saying you pay the 1/5 and the Asham offering, even if you were caught lying, because you can be sorry afterwards. And the sages say you don't pay the 1/5 surcharge, but you do pay the Asham offering, because it's separating the concept with an et. In other words, it's focusing the attention on the Asham offering. And as soon as you're talking about principles that deviate from the principal amount, in other words, multiples, you don't pay the 1/5. That's all it's saying. And the reason why Rav Shimon Ben Yochai sees the connecting vav and the separating et, because the question is, why separate? Why connect something if you're going to separate? And the reality is, he said, you have to separate, show Hashem more respect than the common man. But as far as that's concerned, that's where the et is for. But the vav, the connection, is the concept that just when you don't pay the 1/5, you don't pay the Asham offering either. That's all. All right, guys, we can end off at this note. It's very straightforward. We're going to get into some nice stuff next time. This hasn't been bad either.
Can I say something with the The preposition et in Hebrew, how you do it for yourself.
Tell me.
So if you are the subject, that's what it is. The word it is if like the subject is the specific entity in a sentence or discussion. So if you're talking about yourself, like let's say it is me, you don't say iti, which in Hebrew im is with. So if you say it with me, it's iti. But if you say it becomes ot. So you say oti if you're the subject. And if you say it's him, it's he, like you, masculine, it's otcha, like ata. So it's like, and if it takes a while to understand this, like when you go to Ulpan, that if they don't explain it and you don't, it's very weird the way that you have. It's taken me a while to actually get it. It's taken me years to understand this. I only got it recently.
But I'm not
So
getting it. But please
Gavin,
go.
you understand it?
I tell you something, I'm so glad you actually raised it, because now I'm actually finding Damon's view so easy. It's so easy. Gemara is so easy. Even the text we did now compared to what you just said in the last like 30 seconds. I didn't understand one word. I just heard and it's very difficult. Yeah, I'm joking. I'm just playing with you guys.
So like you say, if something is yours,
if something
is yours, like everything with ani is sheli, like sheli. Et sheli. Okay, sorry, it's not a good example. It actually means pen also. Okay, telephone sheli. Sheli is like me. Think of ani and shel, because shel means have. But if I'm talking about myself, I can't say sheli. I have to say oti. And you can get confused with oti and iti. Iti is with me, and oti is me.
Okay.
I'm the subject. I don't want to confuse. But it takes a while to.
ET
When we
phone
have
home.
an iti, exactly iti. Yeah.
ET phone home.
Don't apologize for not saying it. You don't want to confuse us. It's too late. You confuse us from the first word. We're terrible at Hebrew. I thought I did it, but I think I did it for about 8 or 9 years, and I can't speak it. You can see how hard it is. It's not an easy language. You forget a lot of it, unless you utilize it all the time. Very, very difficult.
100%.
That's why